Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, I wanted to give you guys a further example of why the Shadow Slayer is one of the better advanced classes that you can pick for your character builds, especially if you're going with something melee oriented. And I figured the best example would be to go over another class that I already covered, and that is the Archaic Weapon Master. Now, they both fulfill similar roles. In fact, the Archaic Weapon Master comes out of the Urban Arcana rulebook, which is the supplement to D20 Modern, and Shadow Slayer comes out of the core rulebook. And it's actually in the Shadow Chasers section, but they're both meant to be in that similar vein kind of game there, where it's an urban fantasy kind of setting. Now, the other thing is that they're both supposed to fill some fairly similar roles. They're both supposed to be melee-oriented characters. I mean, obviously, Archaic Weapon Master and then the Shadow Slayer, their abilities are very much geared towards getting up close and personal and hitting somebody with a very, very dangerous weapon, even if those weapons end up being just your own bare hands. Now, when you compare the two, though, there is just a wide gulf of difference between the two of them. I mean, 9 times out of 10, barring any lucky critical hits that maybe trigger a mass damage save and the Shadow Slayer rolls bad, the Archaic Weapon Master is just going to be washed every single time. They are going to get stomped into the ground pretty hard. And it largely comes down to the way they're built, at least with rules as written. That's what we're going with here. We're not going with the adjusted, suggested, fixed version that I came up with, or going with the base version as it's written. And this just exemplifies why you really want to adjust and fix the Archaic Weapon Master. Because even with the fixes, it would do better, but I don't know that it would necessarily win against the Shadow Slayer either. It would do better and stand much better odds. Maybe it goes down to only losing 6 times out of 10. But even still. And the reason for that, again, it comes back down to a lot of the class abilities. But let's go ahead and go over everything. To start with, one of the biggest things is the attack bonus progression. While the Archaic Weapon Master does not have a bad one, it's still ending at a +7 by the time you hit level 10. The Shadow Slayer gets a +10 by the end of it all, so it's progressing 1 point for every level that you take in the class. And if we make all things equal, both are human characters, both hit level 13, meaning they both went 3 levels of Strong Hero and then 10 levels in their respective advanced classes. So we have a 13th level Shadow Slayer and a 13th level Archaic Weapons Master. The Archaic Weapon Master ability is their big selling point is their power to imbue weapons in order to overcome damage reduction. And that's it. That's all it does. It just overcomes damage reduction. No bonus to hit, no bonus to damage, no other supplemental abilities like what I ended up suggesting. It's just a +2 bonus that only makes the weapon count as a magic weapon for overcoming damage reduction. And even then, they're limited to just the weapon that they specialize with. So while they do have those specializations, the weapon focus and weapon specialization helping boost their chances to hit and damage a little bit, the Shadow Slayer can easily do the same thing by picking up feats as they level in advance. And those feats are optional to them, whereas the Archaic Weapon Master has to take those feats, and one of those feats is a class ability. Weapon focus is a requirement to get into the class, whereas a Shadow Slayer, all you need to get into it is a +3 base attack bonus and the Archaic Weapons Proficiency feat. And then it gets worse from there, because the Shadow Slayer is also able to imbue their weapon with power. But it counts towards their base attack bonus and their damage, and it's whatever melee weapon they have, including their hands. So they have a much more an ability that fills a similar role and is much more flexible. And then it stacks with any bonuses they have from feats. So if they have specialized, if they have gone weapon focus and weapon specialization, that's another +1 to their attack bonus progression and another +2 to their damage on top of the bonuses that their Shadow Slayer class ability for imbuing weapons gives them. And then we come to the fact that they have preferred enemies. And depending on how broad or narrow the definition gets to be, it's either a good ability or a really good ability. And while that may not necessarily come up against the Archaic Weapon Master, if the Shadow Slayer has selected humans as their one of their preferred enemies, well, it would not, I would argue, at least as a DM, that it would not affect your ordinary rank and file everyday humans. But for basically characters and certain NPCs, yeah, they'll get that bonus. If the DM allows that. But even if the Archaic Weapon Masters say an elf or a dwarf, well, that ability would very easily count against them. A half-dragon, an ogre, an orc, half-orc, Yuan-Ti, purebloods, whatever race you may be running that your DM has allowed you to run with, they are now guaranteed to be vulnerable, or at least opened up to that vulnerability if the Shadow Slayer selects your race as one of their options. But that's something that's kind of requires some flexibility on the part of the DM, so it's not guaranteed. But if they're not going head to head against one another, then when it comes to going up against the various opponents and NPCs and situations that your DM may be throwing at you, they're still going to outperform when in compared to the Archaic Weapon Master. The Shadow Slayer stands good odds of doing better than the Archaic Weapon Master will, just because they are getting those further bonuses, not only to their attack and damage, but to skill bonuses against those opponents, and they are relevant skills that are going to be used regularly. Spot and listen are massively important skills, and also important to condense them down to perception, but they'll still get perception, and they'll get bonuses to the perception skill if you're doing the adjusted versions that I've recommended here. So even still, that still puts the Shadow Slayer ahead of the Archaic Weapon Master. The Archaic Weapon Master gets their reputation bonus to certain interactions with people that float within their realm of their sphere of influence. So anybody who's knowledgeable about medieval melee weapons, or even Bronze Age, if you're going back that far, Bronze Age weaponry, you get some bonuses, but it's to people who are not necessarily going to be hostile to you to begin with. So it's nice in theory, but it's not going to help you in a lot of situations, whereas having bonuses against favorite enemies across a decent range of skills is going to be helpful for you. And then, we touch on the fact that you're getting a damage reduction against the natural attacks of a lot of creatures. So werewolves, vampires, just even an ogre that's punching you, just even something simple like that, you're getting a damage reduction against it because an ogre counts as a Shadowkind creature. Not only that, but Shadowkind humans count as, Shadowkind magical things. And I would make the argument here that any character who is in these classes that provide any kind of supernatural ability, which in being able to imbue a weapon to count as a magic weapon, I would argue is a magical ability, maybe a poor quality one, but still a magical ability. So if the Archaic Weapon Master is disarmed and they just try to brawl and slug it out with the Shadow Slayer, they are going to still be on a losing end because their damage output is lowered significantly. Now, this is also made up for the fact by if any of these creatures picks up an axe or basically anything that is not a natural weapon, then yeah, that's one problem solved right there. But still, that's still a massive advantage, especially when you consider lycanthropes, and there's a lot of creatures out there that will attack with their natural weapons. That's a huge benefit to have on your side, and it's not a small damage reduction either. And to top it off, the Shadow Slayer gets fast healing. Fast healing is amazing to have on top of that damage reduction. It also makes up for the fact that you only have a D8 for hit points. That's very massively useful. And then there's the final class ability that the Shadow Slayer gets. The final ability for the Shadow Slayer is their Word of Power, and that Word of Power affects creatures that are connected to Shadow, which, as I mentioned before, is definitely what I would consider an Archaic Weapon Master. Even if they're a human being from Earth, with all the history that goes with it, the instant they go into a class that gives them a magical ability, they stop being wholly normal human. They now have magical arcane power flowing through them, which counts as shadow because it's magic. Shadow is just a word for magic because it's something from beyond the shadows, from beyond the pale, and all of that fun jazz. So the Shadow Slayer's class level 10 capstone class ability will work against an Archaic Weapon Master. And what was the Archaic Weapon Master's final ability? Increased weapon critical. Which, again, don't get me wrong, that's great. But that's something that's easily replicated with a feat. So it's a weapon that would normally trigger a critical hit on a roll of 20, now does so on 19 to 20. Or if it's already on a 19 to 20, that expands to 18 to 20. Which, again, nice ability. That is a good ability. But it's one that's replicated by a feat. And it's in melee, where the Shadow Slayer is fairly adept already, and the Shadow Slayer has fast healing. Whereas, what else does the Archaic Weapon Master get? Quick Draw? Okay, great, and it's only limited to their weapon they're specialized with. The Shadow Slayer takes Quick Draw. They can Quick Draw any weapon that they have at their disposal. They also have Weapon Stun, which, okay, great. They can deal non-lethal damage without taking a -4 penalty on attack rolls. Big whoop. It's just, the order of magnitude of difference between the two is staggering. It's massively staggering, and part of it, again, is just the Shadow Slayer is a very well-designed class. It's really, really good. And it's not one that's... It's really, really good without being totally broken, because most of the class abilities are built around being in melee and giving you advantages against specific types of opponents. Some of them are a little bit more broad than others, and there's some wiggle room for interpretation on them, to be sure. But it's still a much better put together class, because it's not going to be overwhelmingly good at ranged attacks. You still can be. You have a great attack bonus, so you can pick up a rifle and still shoot targets with the best of them, but you're not going to be out shooting a gunslinger. Or if you go with the Spec Ops Prestige class, which was a sniper, they had a couple of variations, but the sniper class, you're definitely going to lose out to them with their abilities. And you don't have a huge host of magical abilities either. So a wizard, a cleric, well, mage and acolyte for D20 Modern, they can certainly mess you up in a whole lot of other ways with magic, because, it's D20 3rd edition. The magic system is still broken. So it's a good class. It's a well-designed class. It's definitely something that you consider a high-tier class, but it's not overwhelmingly broken. The Archaic Weapon Master is just a terrible class all the way around. I mean, the only other thing it really has going for it is the fact that its fortitude saves end up at a +7, but then its reflex and will saves, those top out at a +3. Shadow Slayer, it's getting a +5 in all 3 of its saves, so not as good a fortitude save as the Archaic Weapon Master, but it's not nearly as weak in the other categories either. And you really need your reflex saves to be working well in this game. I mean, you're dealing with fireballs, grenades, other explosives, fire in general, flamethrowers, dragon's breath, missiles, all automatic weapons fire, all manner of horrible things that can do terrible, terrible amounts of damage to you. So being able to save against those is important. Not only that, but a will save is important too, because being able to shrug off the charms and effects, the mental domination that other creatures can throw your way is important. And that's something that the Archaic Weapon Master will be susceptible to. Even if you've gone with this terrible class, still having you turn against your allies is still a bad thing for the rest of them, and for yourself too. So overall, the Shadow Slayer is an incredibly good class, and I hope this side-by-side comparison helps to demonstrate that. But that's where we're going to wrap it up for now. If you enjoyed today's video, well then go on down to the comments. Let me know, hit the like button, and just, again, let me know what you thought. Or if you didn't like it, still do the same thing, just click the dislike button instead. I'm certainly happy to engage in the discussion here, and I'd be curious to know if anybody could drum up a defense for the Archaic Weapon Master in the comments there, because looking it over, it is terrible. I mean, looking at it again, I didn't have to try very hard to make it better, I don't think. So, still, let me know what you thought. And if you did enjoy today's video and you're wanting more, well, good news for you. There's 2 more videos popping up over here. One is something Google has decided that you will enjoy that I've done here. The other is another thing that I've done fairly recently that I'm pretty sure you're going to love anyways. Or hell, if this hasn't been your first stop here, then you're clearly enjoying something, so go on down there, hit the subscribe button, and be a regular member here at the Gamers Den. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.